7 Deadliest Diseases from the Past. We are very lucky to be living in a time where many of the deadly diseases of the past had been eradicated. Even if they do still exist, they no longer pose a threat to mankind. In no order of their seriousness, we will bring you to the past where these 7 deadly diseases were such epidemics that the number of people killed were simply enormous, and by enormous I mean, by the millions. Number 7, the Great Plague. Also known as Black Death, this is one of the most devastating pandemics in history. The bacteria which resulted in several forms of the bubonic plague is thought to be carried by fleas living on rats and spread throughout the world through merchant ships. Hygiene barely existed then and streets were totally filthy. Transmissible diseases of this kind spread easily and quickly in such filthy condition. A widely accepted theory of bad air causes the rapid spread of the plague. A person bitten by infected fleas will have boils and tumors around the groin area that ooze blood and pus. Some developed gangrene that will cause the flesh to turn black and die. The Black Death resulted in 75 million to 200 million deaths in the 14th century in just 4 years. It is estimated to have killed 30% to 60% of Europe's population. It took the world a whopping 200 years to recover to its previous population of estimated 450 million. Fortunately, with education and modernization, we are rid of plague today. Number 6, Spanish flu. The 1918 Spanish flu pandemic that struck between 1918 to 1920 is the deadliest influenza pandemic that ever occurred in history. It was so airborne and spread so easily through a simple sneeze or cough. Patients do not exhibit special symptoms, just the usual flu symptoms. The Spanish flu pandemic was so deadly that it wiped out 3% to 6% of the world's population. An estimated 500 million were infected and 100 million people died in a short span of just 3 years. There was no reported specified cure or vaccine. What's weird, but fortunately, the number of new cases fell abruptly, eventually bringing an end to the pandemic. Number 5, Leprosy. Hansen's disease, commonly known as leprosy, is a chronic infectious disease caused by a slow-growing bacteria. The disease attacks the skin, hand, feet, eyes and some nerves, leading to progressive permanent damage to these structures. This will then result in devastating disfigurement, deformation and disability. An infected person may not show symptoms for 5 years to as long as 20 years. In the past, leprosy had been widely feared to be highly contagious. However, through more studies and education, we now know that leprosy is not as contagious as once thought, although extensive direct contact with the infected person is needed for the disease to spread. The way the disease is transmitted is not fully understood. Leprosy was not epidemic, but it was still seen commonly in the past. The good news is, leprosy is now fully curable. Although leprosy is still in existence, it is considered a historical disease because it is now fully curable, and with modern science, early detection is very possible. Number 4, Measles. Measles is a highly contagious airborne disease that spreads easily simply through coughs and sneezes of infected people. Typical symptoms were that of common cold and flu, with fever and red eyes. Following the typical flu symptoms, would be the more obvious ones: red maculopapular rash that generally begins several days after the fever starts. The rash will generally appear on the back of the ears and after a few hours, spreads to the head and neck before spreading to cover most of the body, causing itch. The rash will change from red to dark brown and then disappear. Measles generally resolves about 3 weeks. So what is so dangerous about measles if they can resolve by themselves? It is through the complications leading from measles that some are potentially deadly. Because complications are very common, leading to deaths in history. Mild complications include diarrhea and serious complications include pneumonia and brain inflammation. There were several major outbreaks in history that resulted in high number of measles-related deaths. The exact numbers were not recorded because the deaths were from the complications of measles rather than from measles itself. The good news is, effective vaccine was developed, and in most countries, it is mandatory for children to be vaccinated, and the spread of measles is now within control. Number 3, polio. Polio, usually an infantile disease, is a potentially deadly and highly infectious disease that is transmitted through contact with an infected person. You can get infected with polio virus if you have contaminated feces on your hands and you touch your mouth, where the polio virus enters the body through the mouth. It is less common through sneezes and cough. Polio is scary as most infected people do not show much symptoms. The two most severe symptoms are meningitis and paralysis, which can lead to permanent disability and death. There is no known number of deaths from polio, but the good news is, more than 18 million people were able to walk today, who would otherwise have been paralyzed. Polio is not yet totally eradicated. However, good thing is, most countries, especially developed ones, for example America and Australia, are declared polio-free because of effective vaccines. Polio cannot be cured, it can only be prevented. Number 2, cholera. Cholera is an acute diarrhea disease that is highly infectious and can kill within hours if left untreated. Usually happens in not-so-developed countries with poor sanitation. It is transmitted through unsafe drinking water or unsafe food that had been contaminated with human feces containing the bacteria. The scary thing about cholera is, most infected people do not show symptoms. Only a minority will have very bad diarrhea that cause severe dehydration, that could eventually lead to death. There were 7 large outbreaks of cholera in the last 200 years that claimed millions of lives. One interesting fact about cholera is, if it's treated quickly and properly, the mortality rate is only 1%. However, if it is not treated fast, the mortality rate shoots up to 50% to 60%. Cholera still exists, but it is no longer pandemic because of education and modernization. They can be prevented and treated in time. Number 1, smallpox. Smallpox is a highly infectious disease that is transmitted from contact with an infected person. When the infected person coughs or sneezes, the water droplet from their nose or mouth spread to other people. Smallpox patients become contagious once the first sores appear in their mouth or throat. A person with smallpox will have rash developing into abscesses that are filled with pus all over the body. Smallpox is estimated to have killed 500 million people in the last 100 years of its existence. As recently as 1967, around 15 million cases occurred in a year. We are grateful to Edward Jenner, the scientist who successfully developed the smallpox vaccine that helped the world to be rid of this deadly disease. Although there is no known cure, however, in 1980, the WHO declared smallpox to be completely eradicated. We have come to the end of the video. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. Please help us grow by clicking the subscribe button and don't forget to like.